Good afternoon from Good afternoon from sunny Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia. Thank you, Peter, for this kind introduction, and I would also like Sonia for invitation and the opportunity to be with you today, although unfortunately only virtually. So I hope maybe we'll meet in Prague or Ljubljana after this COVID crisis will end. So today we will talk about the networks and mobility. At the beginning of the late Bronze Age, I will try to illustrate a few examples on how we might trace the movements of people or even migrations in the archaeological record, and also combining this data with the results of the stable isotope research. When I was thinking about the idea or the topic of today's lecture, I decided to present you, let's say, a part of my work in two recent projects that Peter already mentioned them. The first one was in Berlin, and the second one, then after we came with my family back to Ljubljana, I had the opportunity to work at the university. And let's say the combined points of these both projects were topics like contacts, networks, mobility, and migrations. This is, of course, a very vast area of the research. So today I will focus on one specific or particular, let's say, topic, namely how contacts, mobility, and migrations could influence changes in the burial rites. One of the constants in the history of the mankind are mobility, that is the movement of people or animals or even objects, but also immaterial things such as ideas, beliefs, knowledge, values, which are transported with living beings and nowadays even virtually. Since the earliest periods in the human prehistory, we humans have been mobile on the daily basis to ensure, among other things, our survival. This is, of course, not the only motive for human mobility, nor there is only one form, or let's say way of mobility. Mobilities can be long or short-term, seasonal. They can involve individuals or groups, bigger or smaller groups of people. They can be voluntary or not, just to name a few of the examples. Migration is just one form of the mobility. It follows that all migrations are mobility, but however, mobility is not necessarily linked with migration. By using term migration, I mean the movement of people in the sense of changing their residence. But as we know from history, or also from prehistory, the migrations can only be irreversible. So the migrants migrate to the chosen destination and then they go back to their, let's say, place of origin. Mobility and migrations are changing today's world as we can see it, but they certainly did it also in the past. The consequences of these processes can be both positive as well as negative, the latter including the violent conquest of space, colonization combined with force, terror, or even wars, to cite just the most dramatic examples. One of the positive effects of mobility and migrations, however, is that movements drives people to discover the new, the unknown. So mobility and migrations are closely linked to the discoveries, to creativity, or even innovations. Now I would like just to shortly outline the geographical area that is southeastern Alpine region. The territory of nowadays Slovenia with, let's say, its neighboring countries is situated between the fringes of the southeastern Alps, the western part of the country is connected with the Great Hungarian Plain, and the, let's say, southeastern part with northwestern part of the Balkan Peninsula. Three main rivers that are Sava, Drava, and Mura dominate this region. This very area was and still is in the, let's say, crossroads from, on one hand, Mediterranean world, and on the other hand, Balkan world and Central European regions and countries. So it was always on the, it was always connected with, let's say, ways, or the main ways that people used to, let's say, be, that were mobile in a way. So if we have a closer look to the regions of Slovenia, we can see that the western part is connected with Goriška or Primorska region. This part, central part, with Upper Carniola or Gorenska region. Here we can find Inner Carniola or Notranska. In the eastern, southeastern part is Dolenska region or Lower Carniola, and eastern part, here is Styria or Štajerska and Prekmurje region. It is interesting to note that the borders, let's say the borders of nowadays region, really, they are really similar to the regions, or let's say borders, of the Hallstatt cultural groups. But today we will focus our lecture on the Bronze Age. After this short geographical outline, I would like to present, let's say, new investigations about the chronology on the Middle and the Late Bronze Age in Slovenia. Because still recently, we have lack of the C14 dates in Slovenian archaeology, but in 2014, a monograph was published, absolute dating of the Bronze and Iron Age in Slovenia, that gave us really great new insights on the chronological scheme of the early, but also middle and the late Bronze Age. Today I will speak about the periods of the late middle and the beginning of the late Bronze Age that is connected according to the Central European chronology with the periods of Bronze Age B2 C1, Bronze Age C2, and Bronze Age D, that is already late Bronze Age. According to new studies of Professor Tržanic Šrešnar, this very period was denominated as Olores Podsmreka horizon, and now use this term if we are dealing with middle and the late Bronze Age in Slovenia. Olores and Podsmreka are two very famous settlement sites in Slovenia. That's why they choose to denominate this period according to the name of these two sites. The territory of nowadays Slovenia was in the late Middle Bronze Age part of two distinct phenomena. One was the phenomenon of so-called Castellieri culture that was in the western part of the Slovenia. For this culture, huge Castellieri, monumental fortified settlements are characteristic that are still nowadays visible, not only from the sky, but also if you go there, you can see still huge walls made of stones that are quite characteristic for this culture. While on the other hand, the central part of the country and the eastern part, settlements such as Strata near Škofja Loka in Gorenska region were discovered. The settlements are mainly lowland settlements, and while investigating them, we found only post holes and some, let's say, storage pits. So the architecture, if we can use this word, is really different from the Castellieri culture. That's just to outline the differences between these two very regions. Until the beginning of the 80s, only 4 settlements dating to the Middle Bronze Age were known. We knew really little about the Middle Bronze Age in Slovenia, but this picture changed in the last 2 decades when highway construction works revealed a lot of new sites. Here you can see settlements, newly discovered settlements dating to the Oloris-Podsmreka horizon, so to the late Middle and the beginning of the late Bronze Age. And it is clear that the number of sites increased dramatically. Most of these investigations conducted during the motorway construction works are now also published online, so are really accessible to all. And here you can see the link for all these monographical publications, which are really useful. But today I will focus my lecture on burial rites. So we will speak about the appearance of cremation burials in southeastern Alpine region. The appearance of the cremations were till recently connected with the so-called urn-filled culture. The scholars believe that the first cremations in Slovenia should be dated to the beginning of the late Bronze Age. The revision of old finds, but also new discoveries, revealed that we might have some cremation graves dating already to the early Bronze Age. Here you can see an example of the grave from Ptuj. This is a site or city in the eastern Slovenia, where a cremation grave, an urn grave, was found. It was dated to the beginning of the late Bronze Age, but if we see the analogies from the late Unjetice cultural site from Czech Republic, it becomes clear that we might date this grave already to the early Iron Age. A next interesting new find is, let's say, deposition from Lancova Vas near Ptuj. It's also a site in eastern Slovenia where 19 milk teeth and bronze jewelry were found in a small pit. It is interesting that no other skeletal remains were found in the pit, so we cannot say that this is actually the grave, but let's say it's special mode of deposition of human, presumably ante-mortem remains. So it's really, for me, I do not know any analogies from the region that can be also interpreted in this way. As you can see, the jewelry, in German term Noppenringe, dates this deposition in the early Bronze Age. And besides, this is the only find from Slovenia of such type of jewelry discovered until up to date. So it shows clear connections with the regions northern of Slovenia. So now we have a quick look to the site of Podsmreka near Višnja Gora that was also excavated during highway construction works. It is located in the Dolenjska region. A settlement dating to the Middle and the Late Bronze Age was investigated, but besides, 5 cremation graves were also found. All were urn graves of children, with the exception of the grave number 5, where an adult person was buried together, probably together with a child. Otherwise, all 5 graves were graves of the children. Ida Murgal, who published this site, dated the graves and also the settlement to the Bronze Age C and Bronze Age D period. But if we have a closer look to the specific types of urns, we can see that the best analogies for this special type of urn, which is quite unusual for the territory of southeastern Alpine region, can be found in the distant, let's say, regions in the northern Carpathian Basin. To be more precise, in the sites of so-called Pilin cultural group, For example, Radzovce, Šafárikovo, Butkovce, and so on. So from the sites where cremations were in practice already from the Middle Bronze Age onwards. So my question was, how can we, let's say, explain or interpret the similarities in the ceramic forms and ceramic vessels in these two distant areas? So I had an opportunity during my Berlin project to visit Prague, National Museum of Prague, where the cremated remains from Šafárikovo and Radzovce are deposited. I took some samples and sent them to the C14 analysis to check if the relative chronology of these graves really are correct in a way. So the results were really nice. They showed that the graves with these specific types of vessels should be dated to the fourth, let's say, the end of the 16th and the 15th century BC. What is comparable with the Bronze Age B2 C1 periods. Another indication that the graves, the oldest cremation graves from Slovenia, from Protsmreka, could be dated already to the 16th century are also these specific little cups decorated with knops that are found, for example, also in Medvodesvetie, that is the settlement in Gorenska. The cup, like a similar cup, was found in a pit in the settlement, and the sample from that pit also showed that they should be dated to the 16th century BC. So it became clear that the types of vessels used in these first cremation graves could be dated already to the Middle Bronze Age and not to the Late Bronze Age. Another C14 date comes from Malečnik, lowland settlement in Štajerska, where the same cup was found also in one big pit, and the C14 date showed the similar result, so 16th century BC. We have to bear in mind that these cremation graves from Slovenia dating to the middle and the beginning of the Late Bronze Age are really, really scarce. So another indication for the grave could be the finds from Krka. There is a site in Dolenska where ceramics were found, but we do not know if these finds are from grave or possibly from the ceramic hoard. It is interesting again that the best analogies can be found in graves from Eastern Slovakia or Eastern Hungary, like Velké Raškovce in Tiszafüred. And the resemblances are quite astonishing. So the period of the 16th century, as I show you, or 15th century, when the first cremation graves appeared, it seems that in this very period, we also have inhumations under tumuli. The Brezje below Brineva Gora site is the only site in Slovenia that can be connected with so-called Bronze Age tumuli sculpture. And again, the C14 date showed that this burial should be dated to the 16th century. And it's interesting that the pins found in one of the graves are very similar to the pins found in the cremation grave from Santa Hema near Globasnica. This is a site in Carinthia in Austria. It's a cremation grave of a child, and maybe also a probable grave from Turnišće near Ptuj. So the pins were very similar from inhumations and cremation graves that are probably contemporaneous. So we can say that appearance of cremation in the southeastern Alpine region might be influences from the northern Carpathian basin. The number of cremations is really, really low. So we can suppose that burials were meant just for selected individuals, probably. As you can see, it's in Podsmreka, only children were buried in urns. So we might think that alternative modes of burial existed, such as scattered burials in river, marshes, or other water environments that are really hard to trace in archaeological record, but this is just one of the possible interpretations. Another, of course, is the state of research, and we might think that slowly the number of cremations will increase. A century later, so in Bronze Age D and Hallstatt A1, so in 13th and 12th and 11th century, the number of cemeteries or individual graves is still very, very low. In Slovenia and Croatia, for example, new radiocarbon dating revealed that we might really have two phases, one dating to the 13th century, and the second phase of these cremation graves dates this grave to the 12th and 11th century BC. Because until now, we didn't have, as I said, any reliable, absolute chronological dates for these first cremations. Now we have a quick look to the site of Ljubljana, capital of Slovenia, where huge cemetery was found on the left bank of the river Ljubljanica, as you can see it here. And the Castle Hill and the area near Spica were inhabitants during late and then also in the early Iron Age. The site of Dvorišče Sazu, where the necropolis was excavated already in the 70s of the last century, is located here in the center of the city, while other micro-locations show that the cemetery was probably much bigger than just a location at the Dvorišče Sazu. More than 300 cremation graves were excavated, and they were published after the excavations already in 70s and 80s. But the chronological scheme of Gabrovec and Puš showed that the oldest cremation should be dated to the, let's say, Hallstatt B, so 11th, 10th century BC. The revision of the site, which was a part of my PhD thesis, revealed that the oldest cremations are in fact cremations dating to the Bronze Age D, so already to the 13th century BC. The graves were distributed to they were distributed over the whole cemetery in, let's say, small groups, or they were just single individual graves located in the whole area of the cemetery. This small group of 3 graves can be probably interpreted as a small family unit, since we have a grave of a child, of a woman, and probably of a man. The cremated bones were dated with C14, and it clearly showed that we have to bear in mind that these graves are already dated to the beginning of the late Bronze Age. The knowledges for this type of vessels, they are, let's say, jugs with one handle, can be again found in the territory of Northern Carpathian Basin, while they're missing, or they're missing on the territory of Podravina, Posavina, or even in Transdanubia and Hungary. One more thing, and they were found exclusively in the graves of women and children, so that were also anthropologically researched. So this is not just according to the bronze objects, but also according to anthropological analysis in both areas. The cremated bones from one grave with such a jug from Šafárikovo in Slovakia was dated to the 13th, 14th century BC. And you can see here the dates from Šafárikovo, Radzovce, and Ljubljana. So it became clear that they are contemporaneous, and also graves from Ljubljana should be dated as early as Bronze Age D period. Another example is the grave from Radzovce. It is one of the earliest graves, according to Furmanek et al. From this site, they dated this grave to the Bronze Age B2C1. In this grave, two adult women were buried together with infants and one neonatus. And it's interesting that the vessel found in this grave is really similar to the vessel as we saw it before from Ljubljana. The decoration and the shape of both vessels are quite similar. And again, the bone from cremated grave from Radzovce was dated to the 13th, 14th century BC. Here, maybe we should point it out that these were the first C14 dates for the Pilin culture, because before the chronological scheme was made only just according to relative chronology. So yeah, going back to Ljubljana, as I said, we have this small unit of 3 graves, and in all 3 graves, we can see the influences on the ceramics, shapes, forms, decorations that might came from the northern Carpathian Basin. Another grave, 286 from Ljubljana, was a grave of a child where only small cup decorated with knob was excavated. The same cups were found at Šafárikovo, here again in child grave. And we have another indication of clear, let's say, influences from this very area of the northern Carpathian Basin. So if we now have a greater look, both areas use cremations, urn graves. They, in both areas, flat cemeteries were found. Stone grave construction was also documented, and similar types of forms as you saw were used, and types of urns were connected with age and gender of the deceased in both areas. So we cannot speak only that the vessels were similar, but they were used in the same manner in the funeral practices, let's say. The differences between 2 areas are as follows. The number of graves is really small in Slovenia. Bronze finds are extremely rare, and weapons, tools are deposited exclusively in hoards, while the numbers of graves in northern Carpathian cemeteries are much bigger. Bronze finds are present in the graves, and the weapons are also part of the funeral attire. So there are similarities and differences in burial rituals in both areas. Here we have a cremation grave to 278 from Ljubljana, dating to the Hallstatt A period, so a century later, to the 12th or 11th century BC, where small pendant, bronze pendant, was also part of the funeral attire of the deceased. This type of pendants, as you can see it from the map of the distribution, are characteristic mostly for hoards from the south to northern Carpathian Basin, and they were deposited in the graves exclusively in Ljubljana, and one site in Austria and also Hungary. So I guess we can say that these connections from, let's say, between southeastern Alpine region and northern Carpathian Basin persisted also in the following century. This is just one short example. In my postdoc project in Ljubljana, I also made stable isotope analysis on cremated pars petrosa bones from the cemetery at Dvorišće Sazu. It was, let's say, pilot study for this kind of investigations in Slovenia. So the results are really preliminary, but they gave us quite interesting results, because if you can see here, the values of isotope of strontium varies. Here you have the number, the grave numbers, and the value of the pars petrosa from the grave 326. It's really outlier, so it can be interpreted as a, let's say, that individual that was a newcomer was buried within the cemetery in Ljubljana, because it's really different from all other values. It is interesting because it is one of the earliest cremation graves, as I showed you before, and it had the jug, the typical vessel for the cemetery in Ljubljana, but also for the cemeteries of Pilin culture. So another interesting thing is that the grave 327, that was dated a century later, had a similar jug, but we can say that it's not a newcomer, but in fact, it shows a local signal. So a generation later, they still use the same type of urns, but they were all still buried in the same spot of the cemetery. So to conclude, I believe that in the middle and the late bronze, the beginning of the late Bronze Age, these two distinct areas of the southeastern Alpine region and the northern Carpathian Basin, the communities that live in these two different areas had probably somehow different direct contacts that show that people that also include mobility and possibly even migrations, and that the occurrence of the cremations in some southeastern Alpine region is connected with the newcomers from the northern Carpathian Basin. Hvala za vašo pozornost. Thank you for your attention.